Hi, everyone. I'm Aaliyah.
And I am Corey.
Hey, and this is Heavy Business. And today we have on Grammy-nominated mix engineer Dan Malsch, who has worked with big-time bands like Avenged Sevenfold and Ghost and Gojira and many, 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 many more. Dan, thank you so much for coming on our little podcast here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So other than that quick little bio I gave, would you give us a brief summary of your background and what you do and how you got started in music production?
Okay, I'll try to keep it brief. Been doing this for a long time. It's actually the only job I've ever had besides, high school dishwashing jobs and stuff like that. So I been in a bands all my life. My older brothers were in a band, so I used to watch them in the garage, you know, throughout junior high, and then I decided to start playing guitar. And I was always interested in playing guitar and in bands, and I loved, like old metal bands like Judas Priest and all those kind of, old school metal bands. But I was always very interested in the technical part. I remember going into the garage and taking all my brother's equipment apart, putting it back together, trying to figure out why this sounds like that, why that sounds like that. So the technical side was really my first love. But I was in a band, a metal band called Wicked Mariah back in ooh, late 80s, early 90s. I'm still actually in that band right now. We just recorded a new EP. I've been in bands all my life. And I got the bug for recording very early on. Luckily, this band I was in, Wicked Mariah, got a good record deal back in the early 90s. And we got to record in some studios in Germany and California. And I just got the studio bug from there and been working in the studio ever since.
Awesome. Corey?
Oh, I was just going to ask, when you were taking apart all of your brother's things, were you successful in putting them back together?
Most of the time, I got in trouble a couple times because they would come in for rehearsal in the garage, and this garage was made up like a club. It was strange how they did it, lights and everything. And I would take the mixing console apart and figure out why this did this or why this did that. Most of the time, I put it back together. Good, it worked.
Excellent.
So you actually started an academy. When did you start this, like the classes that you're teaching, and how did that come about?
We started about, I'd say, 3 years ago. It came about because I have a lot of inquiries for interns, and I would get guys and girls coming from some of the major schools that everyone knows, and I was surprised how little they knew. It was quite surprising. It was shocking, actually. Um, and I started out as if I wanted someone to work with me, I'd want them to know kind of my techniques and how I go about things and how I like things set up. So I was training all these people because it's frustrating when you want to work with someone and they're used to doing something a certain way or really not knowing a lot. So I started this short 10-week course and kind of started putting kids through boot camp, and it mostly came about of clients of mine wanting to learn how to record, or specifically how to mix, or they have problems with this or that. But it really came about mostly from having interns and realizing, oof, you paid that much money for school, and ugh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Were you self-taught?
yes, totally,
Okay.
100%.
Okay. Yeah, I
I
often
can I
feel
can hardly read. I can hardly read, so I have to be self-taught.
Well, honestly, I think that self-taught is sometimes the best with a lot of things because schools can only teach it one way, and
Yeah,
sometimes that's not the way that works best for everybody. So,
yeah, yeah. I think it's really important. I have small classes, 4 students at a time, and I try to in the classes I try to put people in that are about the same level. So if I have more advanced people, I'll schedule that class to start a certain month. If I have, novice, I don't really get too many novice at this point, but I'll try to because everyone has a different way of learning. And I think as a teacher, you have to be able to read people and you can see if someone's totally not getting it, their eyes are glazing over. So you kind of have to cater things towards them a little more. You just can't open a book and tell people, hey, this is how it's done. You got to do this, A, B, and C. It just doesn't. It never worked like that for me. So I don't think it works like that for most people.
No,
Yeah.
and do you feel like being self-taught, because I mean, I'm sure you know this, the industry and recording techniques and everything have changed so much since you first started to now. Do you think that being self-taught has enabled you to be more adaptable and kind of go with things as technology has advanced?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yes. I mean, sometimes when you're doing stuff by the book, and there are certain things that you need to do by the book, you kind of get stuck in your ways. And that, I'm a little older, but I don't think I think I've progressed with how times have changed. Some of my friends and, some real A-list guys out there, they're kind of stuck in their ways and they haven't modernized with how music is being made these days. It's totally different. And you have to be able to adapt for that. So yeah, I don't think I've ever been stuck in my ways. I don't. I pick things up from young kids all the time, and I just try to. I listen to a lot of records, and I figure out. I'm always playing, like I'm a tinkerer, so I'm always tinkering and finding out. Why does this do this? Why does that do that? Why does this new record sound like this? What are people like wanting to hear? Because I think you get hired a lot for your taste, really for your taste, and how kind of how you make things sound. But I and maybe that's because that's the way I've learned, but self-taught, because it's harder. You got to really, I'm not the greatest at reading something and picking something up, so I have to turn knobs and I have to break stuff and I have to press 1,000 buttons to see why this works or why this doesn't work. So for me, that's how it works. But self-taught is, I would think, it's best.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of self-taught people on this team. I mean, I'm self-taught with what I do. I know Aaliyah teaches herself a lot of things as well.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It kind of makes you more flexible as things change rapidly, which is so necessary in this industry nowadays.
Oh yeah, it's crazy.
And
I
I know that oh, sorry, continue.
no, go ahead. No, I just want to say I got there was a producer that I worked with in the early '90s. His name was Jim Morris. Very, very talented guy. They owned a studio in Tampa, Florida, called Morris Sound, which was like the death metal capital of the world. They did every death metal band you could possibly think of. But I'd called Jim and said, I'm thinking, I want to be an audio engineer. This is what I want to do. Because I was always in the studio while working with him. I was always messing with the console, doing total recalls for him and stuff. And I had mentioned him, Jim, do you think I should go to this school? Because there was only one school really available at the time. And he's like, no, Dan. He's like, what I would advise is buy whatever gear you could afford, teach yourself, and start recording bands. That's what I did. Instead of going to school, instead of putting the money into going to school, I put the money into buying, kind of basic equipment and teaching myself. So sorry, I cut you off, but I thought that was a pretty important point.
It is a very important point and totally much more important than what I was going to ask anyway.
No, no, that's
So I will let Aaliyah ask her next question.
It's all good. So you spoke about like how modern production has evolved and how you kind of have been adaptable to those changes. What do you think is the key to maintaining authenticity and organic song production while balancing that with modern production?
That's a tough one because so I'm going to rewind a little bit and hopefully this is not too
No, go
convoluted.
ahead, please.
Back in the day when we would work on records, you know, there would be a lot of rehearsal, a lot of pre-production, a lot of really getting the parts right. Every note, every harmony, every bass drum hit compared to the bass guitar, everything in sync. There's not so much of that anymore. What there is now, though, is a lot of times if I'm working with a band, I'll get a very elaborate demo from them, a really elaborate. Sometimes I don't even know what to do with it. It's so good. But most of the time, it's a very elaborate demo. But sometimes with that is they get so stuck in what that demo is. It's demoitis And I'm actually going through that right now with a band I'm producing. It's hard to break people away from that demo. Whereas back in the day when you were rehearsing, it was easy to break that down. Everyone was in the room, everyone was kind of feeding off of each other, so you could break all the parts down. Now, some of these bands I work with, they've been listening to their demos for a year, 2 years, and I'm like, well, that chorus, I never say something stinks, but I'd say, right now your verse is better than your chorus, so that's a problem. We should try to get it. So, but they're like, oh, I love this chorus. And it's like, well, so figuring that out, I go through that weekly. And sometimes these guys are doing a lot of girls, these performers are doing a lot of cut and paste and kind of rigging stuff together sometimes. And when you try to get the performance out of them, sometimes they can't do it. Some bands can. Some bands are just incredible and they're just, nailing everything. But that's rare these days. Whereas back in the day, that was the norm. That was the norm you didn't get into the studio because first of all, studio time was so expensive. You were working on reel to reel tapes. So the editing was very slow. Now you can just shift them around and sometimes it's a little bit of a crutch. So I'm not like an old fogey. I'll move everything around. I'll edit stuff to death. But I'd like the parts to be worked out before we record. But that probably only happens half of the time at this point.
Would you say that's the primary thing you wish bands were more prepared for before coming into the studio?
100%. Yeah. It's a crutch. A lot of times I'll work with drummers and be like, you can edit that. Like, yes, but is it going to feel like you played it like a monster? Kind of, not really. It'll work, but some of these newer productions, you lack some of that. I don't know, that raw aggression. I mean, everything's big and loud, and that's kind of easy to do. But that kind of, everyone playing together, like Gojira is a perfect example of that. They are unbelievably tight, and it shows. So.
And how do you push bands about past that hurdle of, oh, you can just edit it or you can fix it in post?
I just do. It's one of those things. As you become more successful, bands start to listen to you a little more. That's one thing I've noticed. I'll tell you a quick little funny story. There's another mixer that I work with very, very often. His name's Andy Wallace, one of the most famous rock and metal mixers out there. And we were working on a particular project together, and I was saying something to the band like, "Hey guys, I think you should do this or this, and this sounds good." And they were a little like, "This is a really big band." They're like, "I don't know." Andy walked in the room, and he's like, "Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I think you should do that." And the band's like, "Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that." So it's one of those things. You kind of as you become more successful, bands will start to listen to you a little more. So, it's not like I say, "Hey guys, I've done this and this, just listen to it. I'm always right." It's just that you earn the respect a little bit. And sometimes if I really disagree with a band, I'll say, "Guys, you hired me for a reason. You're paying me to do this. I'm not just going to yes you to death, because if I disagree with it, I'm going to tell you I disagree. You have the final decision. You're the band. It's your project, but I'm not going to just say I like something because, I want to be agreeable." So most of the time it works out. The difficulty on that thing is you have to you can't just say a singer wants to do it one way and a guitarist wants to do it the other way. You can't go, you have to do that right in front of both the singer and the guitarist. You can't go behind the back of one or the other and say, "Yeah, this guy is not right," or something. You just have to be very upfront and transparent about all that stuff. So hopefully that makes sense what I just said.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, totally.
Totally makes sense.
I always do things in a very positive, nice way. I think sometimes I'm probably too nice, but I'd rather, I'm definitely not it has to be that way. But if I think the part can be better, I'll always say it.
Do you think there are any? Oh, go ahead.
No, and I'd say it's because I'm a musician. it's also important that I can show them is, sometimes you can say, well, I think this could be better. Well, what do you think? Oh, I don't know. Just, I think it could be better. Whereas then you could say, well, guys, maybe we could do this chord and this chord. So I think it helps being a musician as a producer too, because you can actually show them, here's a couple different options. So I think
Totally,
that helps.
totally.
Yeah.
Do you think that having an outside producer is the best way to kind of have that ability to be objective about it? Is there any way that people can be more objective about their own music?
Very hard.
Yeah.
Very hard. Even some of the biggest bands in the world are still using producers. It's so hard because a lot of times what happens, the dynamic of the band, guys are disagreeing with each other, and on a certain level, the bands are so good that you're just kind of the guy that's saying you kind of have to break, be the tiebreaker on certain things, and it's just about having the confidence. It's also, as a producer, you having the confidence to it's hard when you're in the room with some of these really big bands, you know, it's hard for them, for you to say sometimes, guys, I don't know, that's not that great, or especially because I'm mostly mixing at this point. I still produce a bunch, but I'm mostly mixing. You know, it's hard sometimes to disagree with certain changes. A band might have this wild idea, and you're like, that's never going to work. But you can't just say that's never going to work. You have to go through the whole process most of the time. Maybe spend a couple hours on something, and then the band can see for themselves that it doesn't work. Because if you just say it's not going to work, that's what I see a lot of younger engineers and producers doing a lot of times. A band will ask them something, be like, no, that sucks, or that's not going to work. You can't do that. Even if you know that it sucks and it's not going to work, sorry about the language, it's not good to go about it that way, because they're always in the back of their mind. They might be like, well, we never tried that part and the song didn't sell because we never tried those three parts that I was talking about. You know, so it's a lot of
Absolutely.
psychology in this.
No worries about the language, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I
No,
grew
no
up.
worries about it. Because
we say
I
much
grew up
worse.
in. I
yeah,
grew
we
up in
say
Long
worse.
Island in the '80s.
You're fine. Totally fine. Um, so couple technical questions, I guess.
Oh no.
Um, well, do you have any like go-to microphones that you use for certain things? Or does it all kind of depend on the vibe?
So yes, I'm. So I'm still one of those guys that has a ton of equipment. I have a big SSL console I mix on. That's kind of like my signature kind of style of mixing that I'm known for. But I'm not a gear snob at all. I know some people think I am because they walk in the room and they see all this gear. Some of the reason why I have all this gear is because back in the day, you needed to have all this gear because different producers would be working in your room. I always had kind of a commercial residential studio. So they would say, okay, do you have 24 channels of this or 16 channels of this? So I just bought everything. I just kept buying stuff. All my money went to buying stuff. So I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain, to answer a technical question, yes, there are certain microphones that I will pretty much go to. Like for instance, on a guitar cabinet, I'm always using a ribbon mic and a dynamic mic. It's a very standard combination that a lot of people use. It's a Royer 121 ribbon mic and a Shure SM57. Very, very close to each other in phase. I have some ISO room for my guitar cabs, and those mics never move off my cabs. Sometimes if I'm doing like more of like a rock and roll thing, I'll do like an AKG 414. I'll mix that in. And a vocal mic, a there is there are two mics that I will use pretty much all the time. I have the vintage U47 Neumann. I have all those. I don't use those that much for the style of music I do. I use a Manley reference cardioid mic a lot. That's kind of my go-to. Still a Neumann U87 standard microphone I've been using for 1,000 years. And there's a new one, a Peluso, that I will use pretty much all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will use all the time. I have a lot of stuff, but there are certain microphones that I will P49. It's a small company, and it's a magic microphone that works on everyone. Yeah, and it's not $1 million. It's not inexpensive, but it's not, you know, but it's a Peluso P49. That microphone works if you scream into it, if you sing softly into it. It works on everyone. So if you could buy one mic, that would be a Peluso P49. It's probably a few $1,000s, but you could spend a lot more. You could
Yeah,
also
and then
spend
you're only
less.
buying one mic, so
Yeah, it's a great microphone. I swear by that microphone.
do
So
you do you primarily record guitar amps rather than reamping direct input guitars?
So for the newer style bands, because there's a lot more editing usually, I'm doing amplifiers and like a Kemper, but I'm also always taking a DI signal. So I can reamp if needed. And also the DI is really important for editing. So I don't know how detailed you want me to get in this, but if you just record an amp, there's so much compression on the amp, it almost looks like a flat square wave. Flat. You can't see where the spikes are. By recording that DI guitar track, you get all the spikes. So even if you're going to use that just as your editing tool, so you have that, just it
Totally.
looks like a kick drum almost. So I'm always taking, even if I'm just using, because I love amps, I have a bunch of amps. Um, I'm always taking a DI, even just for the editing. And I'm kind of late to the Kemper world. I'm actually staring at my Kemper. Right? Do you know what a Kemper is at all?
Kind of. I know people, the guitarists talk about it.
Yeah. So I'm kind of late to the Kemper world, but I actually just got one about a month ago. So I think my phone's ringing. Oh,
Oh,
did I lose you? Sorry.
nope, you're here.
Okay.
Do you have any other technical tips? Like, do you usually quad track guitars or any nuanced things like that?
Yes. So that was one thing that I might be a little stuck in my ways or for. Yes, for heavy bands, I'm quad tracking guitars, two on the left, two on the right, and sometimes in the chorus, one up the middle, just to add a little more. But I'm constantly changing something. So if I'm doing two guitar tracks on the left, it's not the exact same amp sound. It's going to be the same guitar a lot of times because of tuning and intonation. Even if the intonation is perfect on the guitars, sometimes I'd rather use two separate amps than two separate guitars because the tuning's a little better. But I'm going to be changing something on the amp because if you just track two of the same guitar sounds, a lot of times it's just louder. So even if you just roll a little treble off or a little bass or add a little more mid range, it's going to have more spread. So yeah, always, especially for heavy stuff, two on the left, two on the right, one up the middle. If there's more like jamming stuff, sometimes not. Sometimes it's just a left and a right. And sometimes, even if it's a guitarist, like I record a lot with a blues guitarist, Eric Steckel. He's kind of playing, kind of like feel a lot of it's worked out, but he's doing like little nuances. So it'll be a left and a right, but it's almost like two separate guitar players are playing. So
Totally. Something
yeah,
more organic like that. What about
yeah,
voices? Do you
yeah.
do that?
I'm a big harmony guy too. So pretty much for metal, I'm doubling a lot. Sometimes not in the verse, so it sounds a little too Ozzy type of thing. Ozzy's great, but that kind of
Sure.
heavy chorus. But not on the verses a lot because I think it's a little too robotic. But when you go into the chorus, I'm always doing a double and maybe a low octave, and then I sometimes put too many harmonies in and then take them away because I have a
Better that.
guy. I have I have a guy. His name's AJ Larson that I work with a lot on productions. He's just amazing with harmonies. He can just come up with every harmony you could possibly imagine in like no time. So we tend to just stack, 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 and then if it sounds too much like a choir, then I'll just start knocking down. But a lot of times, if you blend it low enough, it just you know I like
Yeah.
harmonies.
A lot of times there's like a million harmonies. They're just super quiet, but it just makes it all sound better.
Yeah,
I get
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Any funny stories or anecdotes that brought about important lessons that you can think of?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So I can tell you. I mean, it's a lot of stuff that I probably can't say here, but yes, there's a very good lesson. It wasn't that long ago. I knew this lesson, but this lesson would be for anyone who's maybe watching your show. Um, so I was working with a band, pretty well known band. They're getting more and more well known, and their manager was here, and the engineer and assistant I had working with me, the manager would ask, say, let's try this. And the assistant that I had worked with would immediately say, it's really not going to work. And he did it about 10 times. The manager kept asking him, let's try something. And he kept saying, no, 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 no. And I could tell the manager was getting frustrated, but I kind of let it go because it was a good learning experience. And I was friends with the manager, so it wasn't. So the manager finally took my assistant out of the room and scolded him because he was saying, when I ask you to do something in front of the band, at least try it to see if it's bad or good. So that's kind of the thing I was talking about. You should pretty much always try something. Don't immediately say, oh, that's not going to work. Even if half the stuff probably didn't work, it wouldn't work. But that's kind of a lesson learned for always try it, always be open, always be positive. I'll tell you one other thing too. I was working with a singer from Canada, and you know she was a little temperamental. I think that's the right word. Is really nice, easy to work with, but you had to be very careful with your words as far as amazing singer, but her confidence would get beaten up really easy. So I'd been working with her for a while, and we developed a good relationship as I just knew how to ask for things without it's a confidence thing. Amazing singer, but confidence needed to be built up a little bit. But
Sure.
I stepped out of the room quickly to get lunch because we were working like 15 and 16-hour days. I came back in and she was crying, crying, crying because the assistant that I had with me wasn't as, you know, polite and nice. You have to be able to read people in this business. Reading is the biggest. You have to read the room. Reading the room is everyone's different. Every person in the world needs different attention. And it's up to you. You're the leader in the room. You're the one who's getting paid, so you have to. So it's really, and I don't know teaching that is tough, but being able to read the room is really important.
Yeah, because some people can just some people are just like, lay it on me, be
Oh,
blunt, like
absolutely.
all that, and but
Yeah.
not everybody is like that, obviously. So I can
boys
imagine.
and girls boys and girls the same. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. Some guys I know, just like you said, want to be like, that sucks, and that's what they want. But then some, you say that once and they're done for 2 days, you
Absolutely.
know so
Oh,
I
I
saw
was
you
gonna
take
say,
a breath, Corey. Go ahead.
yeah. I was gonna say, what would be, because you've had a long career, you've gone through the self-taught route. What would be your biggest piece of advice for somebody taking their first steps towards recording either their own project or wanting to get into recording other people's projects like you did?
okay, so well, that's a tough one because so for one, you have to get equipment. You have to, and luckily equipment is less expensive these days, but it's still expensive. um two things I would say. I would kind of record myself at first. Record yourself until you get good, because unless or find a friend's band that you know really well and you could mess up on them and like it could sound bad. Just kind of do that before you reach out to a band, and especially in a small town, all of a sudden you make a bad recording and that goes around pretty quickly. What I would try to do is for a while record myself, record friends band, and then try to develop some kind of internship with a studio, and work in that studio, and then maybe try to bring a band in overnight or after hours and record a band there, because trying to buy all that equipment would be a little rough in the beginning. but equipment's, is really accessible these days. So I would say record yourself for quite a while, then find a friend's band, work with them, really polish your craft, then reach out to kind of like not the best band in town, maybe the second or third best in town, and offer to record them for free, and then you know work super hard on it. You can make no money. In this business, you don't make money for a long time anyway, so it's just about honing your craft. And then once you like, oh, you know, I can do this, then, go to a club, find, like I said, it's not going to be the biggest band in town because a lot of time they already have relationships set up. Find a band that you think is really good, and then hopefully you're interning or working in another studio and try to talk to your boss if you're under in the studio. Because I do that all the time and let people come in after hours and record them because it gives them a good impression being a real, quote unquote real studio.
That's true. Sometimes people like want to do their behind the scenes footage too in a real studio.
Yeah.
Real studio.
No, it's take a pic. Yeah, whatever that is. Take a picture in front of the console, the whole. And I'm not a studio snob. Don't I'll record anywhere. I want someone to hire me to record somewhere else because I need to get out of the studio. So it's like, I'm desperate. So
Do you have any tips for like bedroom studio recording? Do you think it's possible to get good audio recording it yourselves at home?
yeah, for sure. Yeah, my son, I set up a whole studio for him in his college dorm, which is it's a little cement college dorm. It sounds great. The most important thing is the room. I know it's if you're recording in a cement room, no matter actually the better microphone you have is going to make it sound worse because it's just going to magnify how bad that room is. So you can get some packing blankets at like U-Haul has them or even Walmart has them. Just deaden the room up because you can't try to get fancy with all kinds of diffusion because that gets expensive. It's best to just deaden the room up. A corner of a room, corners are tough, but I would use packing blankets. You could even get uh well, it depends how big the room is. Like the biggest couch you can get, like kind of absorbs some of the bass, like a big material couch. But there's an amazing there was a record, geez, it was a long time ago. It's the singer of Depeche Mode. His name's escaping me right now. A friend of mine produced one of his records. Dave Gahan, right? Is that right? Depeche Mode singer? I think so. I think that's his name. But
Yes.
they did a record in my friend's apartment in Manhattan, just a little apartment. And they said, okay, well, these are the demos. And, when we get a budget from the label, we're going to go re-record all this stuff in a real studio. They could never capture what they recorded. And this was early on. And, so you can record a record anywhere as long as you know what you're doing. The only thing that gets a little tough is the drum thing. If you want to get that big live drum sound, but, you could do it all with samples too. But if you want that kind of experience of room mics and a whole thing. But other than that, you can record anywhere. It's just as long as one of my things that I do is I build studios for other people. I just built a massive studio in New Jersey. The studio is probably the building's like 10,000 square feet, but the studio is massive. But I build big ones, and I've also built real small ones for people too. A bedroom is you could do a whole record in a bedroom. And gear is so great now. $500 microphones are so good now that I don't know. I have a hard time hearing the difference between a $5,000 microphone and $1,000 microphone. The only difference is with some of the vintage stuff, it goes up in value. So that's the whole thing. A lot of times you buy one of these newer, or it's just going to go down in value. So if you're buying like a Neumann or something like that, they usually hold their value. They keep going up. That's a whole different thing. You're buying gear for a collector's type of thing. But geez, you can get great microphones for $300.
I have one more question, but Corey, do you have anything before I?
I just have one. I have one final question, but I'll leave mine till the end. You know what it is, Aaliyah.
Okay. Yes, I do know what it is. This can take as long as you want or as little time as you want, because maybe there's no answer to this question. But earlier on in the podcast, close to the beginning, you mentioned when you're listening to a band, you might hear the song and say, oh, the verse is better than the chorus. And you just, or, this part isn't as strong as it could be. Do you have any metric by which you can judge that? Or is that just all intuition? And how do you build your intuition if you don't have that intuition?
So it's definitely a lot intuition, but I also do a lot of research when I'm producing a band. So, for instance, I just got hired to produce a band that wants to sound like Alice Cooper in 2025. That's kind of what they're going for, the whole look and the whole thing. So I'll do so much research of Alice Cooper, and I'll know, his choruses do this, his choruses do that. And a lot of it is intuition, but I'm very technical about it also. Whereas, if you tell me you love Slipknot, I'm going to listen to Slipknot songs, and if Slipknot's chorus is going on and then yours is like, but a lot of it is, and also I listen to so many styles of music, and I'm kind of known a little more for heavy rock, but truth be told, I don't listen to a lot of it unless I'm working on it. Just, but I will.
You hear the hot tea here.
Yeah, it's just, you'll never hear me blasting Metallica. But if I get hired to produce a band like that, a month before I'm working with them, I'll be cranking Metallica all the time when I'm working out or whatever. But if I'm just listening, I'm listening to Women of Country or 70s hits or like Steely Dan or it's just, I don't know.
That brings up another question, actually. Do you have bands give you a reference album or a song, or what do you ask bands to give you for reference?
Yeah, almost all the time. Because I always say to the band, what are we shooting for? I always like to have a target, and you're never going to sound exactly like that and or that target. But I need everyone to know this is what we're looking for. So yeah, almost always give me 3 or 4 references of in a perfect world, in the best case scenario, what would you love to be like? Basically, you could tour with this band. So because I don't want to be. I'm producing a country record right now for a younger singer, and we kind of started out wanting to sound like Adele, and then it turned into more mainstream country. So
Yeah.
that was a little search because this particular person was a little younger, so it was a little I think that they were kind of finding out what they wanted to do, but it's always good to have a direction and a target.
Right. And you mentioned this older reference material. Do you have any issue with using only exclusively older reference material?
No.
Generally, wondering if that's a common thing that people want more modern references or not.
I think that's a mistake, because if I was producing or working with your band, I would say, where do you guys want to land? What do you love? Because there's a market for everything. If someone says, "Oh, you have to do this, that," they're lying to you. It just has to be a great song. It just has to, whatever your market is and your audience and what you want to do. Like you're a symphonic metal band, and all of a sudden they're trying to play, it's like a real new modern band. I don't know. I just went to Louder Than Life, and why can't I think of all the bands I saw? Whoever.
Orgasm.
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. I actually I worked vocals with a symphonic. They're kind of symphonic. They're a band called Everdawn. Everdawn, do you know them
Yeah,
at
I know
all?
them. Yep.
Yeah, they're Dan is a friend of mine. I did vocals with the singer Helena, no, what's her name?
Alina, maybe?
She's from Canada.
Yes, she's from Canada. Yeah.
Writer. Yeah. So I produced vocals on their last record. They did them here.
Oh,
Yeah,
awesome.
but I think that's a strange thing to want. I mean, I think it's strange just to want a more
So you
modern.
don't have any problem listening to an older reference and modernizing it in your own
No,
mind. Okay.
no.
And do you ever recommend or have bands listen to things outside of their genre to bring like an interesting sound dynamic to their genre? Because one of the clients that I work with is in a gothic metal band. And while he's not so much a fan of the band itself, he's a huge fan of Electric Callboy, which is in no way gothic, like
Yeah,
even slightly. And he's been listening to them and wanting to bring some sort of something of that into a genre that's, kind of a, I don't want to say stagnant, but one that's kind of been more dormant than it has
yeah,
been in the past. So do you ever advise people listen outside of their genre to bring in these interesting sound dynamics?
for sure. Yeah. Um, Almost all the time, especially if something like you said is kind of a little, you don't want to say stale because that's not a, but it maybe someone's in a rut and they just 10 songs sound exactly alike. They're always going to this chord structure in the chorus. They always have 8 bars and, you know, 4 bar pre-chorus. Yes, always, almost always actually. Especially if someone is really stuck and, like just say someone only listens to Type O Negative, and every song they, you know, writing sounds like Type O Negative. I'd probably say to them, well, Type O Negative's done that already, so why don't you
Yeah.
try to expand on that a little bit?
And not even necessarily for their own work, but because maybe their work isn't stale, but
Yeah,
it's to bring in something to the genre itself. Because
yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of bands out there doing a lot of different things, but being able to bring something from something that's so heavily influenced by pop into a goth genre is
it'd be awesome.
an interesting dynamic.
I love that.
Mhm.
Well, on the Avenged Sevenfold record that we mixed here, I don't know if you guys have heard that record, but
Mhm.
that has like a ton of hip hop
Mhm.
influence in it, and it's mostly on the bottom end with the 808 stuff. But yeah, they actually brought in a lot of just from jazz to hip hop to string sections, orchestra, you know, 70s harmonies, and so yeah. I would say the more the merrier most of the time.
Mhm.
Awesome. I think this is a great place to wrap things up. Corey, do you want to ask your
My super
final,
important question, that's
very
the most
important
important
question?
question.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, most important question of your career. What is your favorite dinosaur?
Dinosaur.
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh, probably a T-Rex because I'm always have this dumb thing where when people playing drums, I always say that they should have like a miniature drum set and play with T-Rex arms. I say it all the time. I don't know. It's when I'm getting when it's late night in the studio. I think this would be great if you had the tiniest drum set and played with like little T-Rex arms. So probably a T-Rex.
I think that's a good reason
It
to
is a good
say
reason.
T-Rex. Yeah,
I love it.
Why not?
absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for coming on the podcast. And everyone listening, thank you for listening. And until next time, make like a bull and throw those horns up.